Premier Furey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, I want to begin here with equalization. Of course, your province has started a constitutional challenge over it. We're now hearing interest from British Columbia. Alberta's deciding whether or not it wants to seek intervenor status. Is equalization broken?
I believe the formula is, the spirit of the formula is enshrined in the Constitution, has not been adequately applied currently. So whether it's broken or not adequately applied or adequately reflected, I guess it's semantics. So yes, I suppose it is broken. As you're aware, in the Constitution it says there should be contemplation for equivalence of services, for equivalence of taxation. So if we can simplify that as A minus B equals C, we only contemplate revenue, we don't contemplate services and the delivery of services. And in a place with like Newfoundland and Labrador, that has one of the lowest population density, of a province, and one of the lowest, including the territories of the country, the delivery of services is very different. It's very challenging, and it costs more. There's no way a total hip replacement costs the same in downtown Montreal as it does in St. Anthony. There's differences of scale, there's differences of delivery of services, and we believe that the spirit of that is fundamentally flawed and has never been reflected. There are other countries, by the way, with similar schemes as equalization that have proxies for delivery of service cost models. That isn't being applied here in Canada, and we think that therefore it isn't fair. And if you look just simply at the math, if you look at how much has been distributed since between 2010 and 2023, there's been $150 billion given to CPAC, Nova Scotia, PEI, New Brunswick. And they may rightfully deserve it. It's not a slight on them. But in that same period of time, the people of Newfoundland and Labrador have received zero. Now that's not fair. That cannot be a fair allocation of those funds. I don't believe it was the spirit in which it was put in the Constitution, and that's why we're challenging it. There are obviously some mechanics of the formula that we debate and have problems with. Changes made by Prime Minister Harper, by the way. So this isn't particularly color-based political commentary. It's a structural issue with the formula that we would like to have an open debate on as well.
An open debate, although, you know, when we speak to federal officials about it, and this is not on camera, but they point out that Ottawa funds Newfoundland on so many different levels. And one figure they pass out, they will say, for example, that in 2022, from the federal coffers, more than $2 billion was transferred over to Newfoundland Labrador than they collected from the province. So how do you respond to that?
So let's compare. If you want to compare apples to apples, that's a very rudimentary and I would say myopic argument, and it seems to make sense. That's why people, I guess, subscribe to it so quickly. Compare apples to apples. If you're going to compare all the transfer payments, let's compare all the transfer payments to Newfoundland and Labrador compared to all others. In 2023, we received $1,600 per person. That's the same as Ontario. It's the same as BC. The other Atlantic provinces received approximately $4,000 to $5,000 per person. I don't see any battery plants coming to Newfoundland. We welcome them if they want to bring money in to bring battery plants. If they're going to put all the money in, let's put all the money in. And then you compare apples to apples. It's myopic and insulting, frankly, that any official would suggest that we gave $2 billion more than they took in for Newfoundland and Labrador. Insulting, and frankly, I'd love to hear the names of those officials because it's factually incorrect and insulting to the spirit of the Federation and, frankly, the spirit of that formula.
Now, as I say, a number of provinces have raised their eyebrows with what you're doing because they too are interested in equalization, revisiting it. Scott Moe of Saskatchewan, he suggests taking the whole kitty, dividing it in half, distribute 50% based on per capita, and then the other 50% based on the current formula. What do you think of that?
Look, I don't have an opinion about how it should be revised. Our challenge is to bring heightened awareness and perhaps a legal opinion on whether it should be revised. I think there has been no discussion. The last revision was in 2008 under former Prime Minister Harper. There's been no discussion about the formula since that, despite the changing economics, despite the changing population density and demographic issues that have fundamentally changed the construct of the country, yet the formula remains static. So we are using this legal challenge, this public challenge, this policy challenge, not to say what the formula ultimately should be, but to say that it deserves to be revisited, it deserves to be revised to reflect a modern 2024 Canada, and one which I think should enable resource development and not act as a disincentive for resource development. Because you look at the formula right now, those who develop resources are actually punished to a certain extent. There's no contemplation for the regulatory regime, the risk that the provinces take. For example, we're developing wind to hydrogen. That costs money. Yet once we grow the economy and the fiscal instrument from that, that gets clawed back. So there's arguably a disincentive to develop your resources. Why would you develop it if you can stay on equalization? So I think that there needs to be further contemplation about the spirit of the formula and the actual mathematical calculation of the formula.
Now, I know you are in conversation right now as a response to the challenge that your province has launched, but when I think about talking and discussion, that is a big point of this meeting of premiers as well, because there seems to be right now real frustration in the room that the Prime Minister, to hear it from the premiers, is not doing enough consultation before moving forward with federal programs. What do you say to that?
I share that concern about we'll politely call it jurisdictional creep. I'm very cognizant and aware of trying to change or shift the constitutional parameters with fiscal instruments while you cannot achieve it through legal instruments that are enshrined in the Constitution. I think that fundamentally shifts the country, and so I think that's why premiers are protective. It's not being territorial. I want to work with the federal government. I don't want to work for the federal government. That's not the arrangement of the federation. I want to work with them, and I don't want to work against them. I want to work with them, but I don't want to work for them. And I think it's important that those jurisdictional lines be respected. There are plenty of places where we can work together that if the federal government decides that it wants to have an impact on what could arguably be provincial jurisdiction, like childcare, have a discussion with us. Come and have a collaborative approach. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us how we can be partners. But to wake up one morning and hear that there's potential pharmacare or potential dental care, which is arguably, well, it isn't arguably, it is provincial jurisdiction, with no consultation or collaboration, or I mean that's where I have concern about the shape-shifting of the Constitution and constitutional obligations between the division of government, division of powers. I truly think that Canadians expect and deserve the different levels of government to work together. That's when Canada is at its best. That's when Canadians shine. That's when the vision of Canada is on true display, is when different levels of government are respecting their jurisdiction but working together within the confines to achieve what's best for Canadians.
Now, the premiers have asked for a First Minister's meeting with the Prime Minister. The tone of the letter a bit harder this time around, saying that Prime Minister Trudeau actually cares about cooperative federalism, while the premiers are ready and on standby to have talks with him. You talk about jurisdictional lines. You certainly share party lines with the Prime Minister. Yeah. I'm kind of wondering what he has said to you when you have turned to him to say there should be a First Minister's meeting.
Look, I can appreciate the position the Prime Minister is in right now with respect to some of my provincial colleagues and the difference of ideological views that could lead to different friction and tension points. I do believe that fundamentally Canada works better when there's a collaborative approach across the jurisdictions. I think the Prime Minister believes that too. I mean, obviously we share significant common beliefs. We don't agree on everything, and our conversations in the past have been, look, premiers and prime ministers shouldn't agree on everything. If we do agree on everything, then you're not doing your job, I'm not doing mine. And we don't agree on carbon tax, we don't agree on the cod moratorium and the allocation and allowing offshore trawlers, foreign offshore vessels off our shore. We don't agree on clean fuel standards. We don't agree necessarily on some resource allocation issues, but we do agree on a lot of progressive social issues. So I would love to have a First Minister's meeting that allows some airing of tension, some relief of tension, and perhaps allows for a reset of the federal-provincial relations. But that's rightfully the Prime Minister's decision to make. I'm happy to continue in a bilateral nature with him as well. Again, we have a good relationship, but despite having differences of opinions on different items, but that's his decision to make, not mine.